So you would think that 9 years into owning rental properties, and most of mine being turnkey rental properties, but I'm not sure that totally matters for this conversation, you would think that I would have learned most of what I needed to know by now. However, I just had a situation happen on one of my properties that when I say it out loud, it seems really obvious, but there's like kind of a twist to it as to why it maybe wasn't so obvious in the moment. So here's what happened. I have multiple property managers just because of who will manage what properties where, who does Section 8, who doesn't, blah, blah, blah. So as it goes with property managers, there seems to always be a cycle. They start out phenomenal, and at some point they start to suck. So that started happening with one of the companies I was working with. So fortunately, one of the other managers that I had worked with, who's actually my favorite, had recently started expanding where all they would take properties and what kind of properties. So I was like, score, I can move these properties that this manager has over to them. So I wasn't able to move all of them, but I was able to move some. And at the exact time that I was moving those properties over, so now paint the picture here. Bad property manager, I need my properties out of there as soon as possible, going to the good property manager. One of the properties, so the transition between managers happened, it began mid-July. One of the properties, tenants, the lease was up at the end of August. So instead of having the bad manager who was currently managing, because they wanted to, find out if they were going to renew or whatever. And I said, don't do that, because I didn't want them in charge, because I was going to be shifting managers. So we shifted managers, and the new property manager immediately reaches out to the tenant and says, hey, your lease is ending. This property happens to be in Georgia, so it's not like California where it switches to month. It needs to be renewed for another year or however long. So the tenant goes back and forth, and then eventually she says, yeah, I'm leaving. Cool. So the tenant stays until August 31st. So we're literally waiting. The property, we're already starting to market it, look for new renters, but we can't go into the property to see the condition, to know what work's going to have to be done. We can't do any of that. So the tenant leaves last weekend, and the new manager goes over there. It was like I should have started my morning drinking mimosas and strong ones, because I had no idea what's coming. The first picture I get is, well, this isn't a good start. And the tenant has dumped all of her furniture onto the front yard. And I was like, definitely not a good start. So the property manager proceeds to go into the property, only to find out, I'm not going to say it's trash, but it's in pretty bad shape. The carpet is basically, I was supposed to say totaled, ruined. The whole thing is going to need paint. There's all sorts of stuff going on. Well, here's where the little catch came in. So normally if you have a tenant and a property manager, or if you're the landlord or whatever, you do a move-in inspection. And that move-in inspection is absolutely critical to know whether you can charge the tenant for damage, or, the tenant has to give their property back in its original condition. But that move-in inspection is the proof of that move-in condition. Without that, you have no ground to stand on. So currently, as it stands, I'm looking at about a $12,000 turnover. Primarily, well, not primarily, but partially because we're going to take all the carpet out and put LVP down, so I never have to deal with this again. But there's it's going to be a gnarly turnover. So every penny of that tenant's security deposit counts, because most of this damage and whatever is her fault. Obviously, the dumpster stuff in the front yard, but so the new manager said, well, I never received the move-in inspection from the previous property manager. Can you dig that up, or, I can reach out to him or whatever. We went back and forth. Now, keep in mind, we're dealing with a bad property manager here. So finally, like, we're literally dependent on this move-in inspection to determine what, if anything, we can keep out of this tenant's security deposit after she's just demolished the house. So finally, after back and forth and just headache after headache, we get the move-in inspection. Here's the key learning here. If you do a move-in inspection, take pictures of everything, good or bad. Even, it's very tempting to only take pictures of the things that are wrong. Ultimately, that's not what's important later. You need proof that things were in good condition before that tenant moved in, because you need that proof to say, hey, this damage is the tenant's fault. Therefore, I'm charging the tenant for it. Because on a security deposit, when you give that back, you have to be able to itemize and prove that that tenant caused that damage or whatever it is. So the lesson for me, and so the reason I don't want to say that I never picked up on it, I just never really thought about it, is I've never had a tenant turnover happen at the exact same time that I'm changing property managers. So the property manager who did the move-in inspection or didn't do the move-in inspection or whatever, usually is the person to let that tenant out also. And in theory, it shouldn't really make a difference, but it kind of has, because it was, when it was all in-house, I never really had to think about those itemized details. So therefore, I know about move-in inspections and I know they're important, but I never understood the criticality of them until I became such a big part of this process because of this change in management. So unfortunately, we don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be, but the reality is the move-in inspection that was done by the bad property manager is not good at all. There's only some kind of fuzzy pictures of the things that were wrong. And we don't know if what pictures are in there are going to be enough to uphold the fact to be able to say, yes, this tenant caused this damage. So I'm literally, I think the tenant security deposit was like $1,100, which in the big scheme of it isn't going to help a whole lot on $12,000 turnover. But that's $1,100. That's a big difference. So I'm currently right this second at risk for not being able to charge her for a lot of the damage because this move-in inspection was not thorough. So the question always is, well, if we charge her for this and she wants to fight us on it, can we uphold it in court? And without pictures, that is very hard to do. So my lesson learned, like I said, I'm 9 years into owning rental properties and working with property managers and having tenants and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just now realizing the absolute criticality of that move-in inspection. So whatever you do, document everything and take pictures of everything. Because on the flip side, when that tenant's ready to leave, if there's anything wrong, that's going to be the proof that you need to be able to charge that security deposit. So, or charge them from their security deposit. So it was a little bit of a long-winded explanation into why move-in inspection is so critical. And I'll probably just do a video explaining why the move-in inspection is so critical. But the reason I share this whole story is to further encourage this idea as a real estate investor. You are constantly going to be learning lessons. This lesson might cost me $1,100, and actually it's going to cost more because this is a whole different video. The bad property manager put this tenant in and never did any of the repairs, whatever. So I'm kind of shafted from both ends. But, like I said, I'm 9 years into owning rental properties and dealing with all of the same stuff. And this is something yet again that's new. So when you're an investor, regardless of what strategy you're doing, just understanding that real estate investing is such an on-the-job training. Like, you can read about all this stuff and whatever, but you are going to learn most of your bigger lessons by doing it. So the couple takeaways from that is, number one, don't judge yourself or get on yourself for something going wrong. And number two, just be ready for it and really just try and learn those lessons as best you can. I can promise you there will never be a move-in inspection without a million pictures. That's easy. So, really take time to, work with your property manager, make sure everyone's being thorough, but really just kind of go easy on yourself if something like this happens. It's unfortunate. It's about to cost me an arm and a leg, but I can promise you there'll be a lot of things not happening again on my properties from here on.